Remember good old Beedrill, your frontline fighter against psychic types, your stalwart defender against the most broken type of the first generation? It has a dual type shared between bug and poison. Bug types do not resist psychic at all, but poison is weak to psychic, which means the best defense against psychic type Pokemon and moves is itself weak to fucking psychic. Oh boy, the mere existence of the psychic type throws the type chart into complete disarray, however well balanced the idea may have initially been. Just take Wrap and Bind for instance. They can attack anywhere from 2 to 5 turns, dealing a small bit of damage over time. Neither Pokemon can do anything until Wrap runs its course, and the opponent is still going to be doing damage that entire time. It's like an extended variation of Fury Swipes or Pin Missile. Not only can it be frustrating to sit back and slowly watch your health drop, if your Pokemon is slower than the opponent, there is absolutely nothing stopping them from deathlocking you. Erica's gym has a ton of Pokemon in it with the move Wrap, and there were several points where one of my Pokemon simply couldn't act out of this broken Wrap lock. The issue could potentially get even worse when Sleep enters the picture, which in Generation 1 takes away your entire turn to wake up. Theoretically, this means that you can be sleep locked and subsequently Wrap locked at the same time. It punishes you severely for having slower Pokemon, and a surprising amount of trainers throughout Kanto have the move on at least one of their Pokemon. These problems often branch out into the overall level design. Your first choice is between Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur. For this first area, the only 2 sane options are Squirtle and Bulbasaur, unless you want to have a really bad time. What Pokemon can you catch before going up against the first gym? Pidgey, Rattata, Nidoran female, Nidoran male, Spearow, Caterpie, Weedle, and Pikachu. What are the good options against Rock-type Pokemon? Well, Pidgey and Pidgeotto are normal flying types, so all of their moves are resisted by the rock typing. All of Rattata's moves are once again resisted by the rock typing. Caterpie and Weedle are in pretty much the same boat. Pikachu's not only extremely rare, but I mean, have you watched the anime? Not a great pick. Butterfree is realistically the only option that makes sense, because it learns Confusion and Poison Powder for some reliable special damage and status ailments to whittle down Brock's team. But even then, there's no guarantee that Butterfree will even last that long with its piss-poor defense. Plus, I recently learned that status ailments don't mean anything, because gym leaders can instantly heal them on a whim. Moral of the story here is that your early game difficulty choices are easy, easy, or grind until it becomes easy. Squirtle learns super effective moves against rock types, and so does Bulbasaur, leaving Charmander in the dust. Now, I don't expect Pokemon games to be perfectly fine-tuned with a smooth difficulty curve, as that's practically impossible. Unlike other RPGs, Pokemon has an unprecedented amount of variables to account for. 15 different types, even more type combinations, type matchups, 150 different Pokemon you can control, and the player chooses to do whatever the hell they want with any of those Pokemon at any given time. Asking any team of human beings to perfectly balance a game with that many options would be hell on earth, and I will never demand perfection of any Pokemon game. I actually like the idea that your Pokemon selection affects each game's difficulty organically, meaning you struggle at different points depending on what team you build. I started with a Charmander on my most recent playthrough, caught a Caterpie, and trained it up to Butterfree so I could stand a chance. The fight itself was refreshingly challenging for a veteran, and even got me to develop more interesting strategies to survive. But I do have limits. There is a point at which I draw the line, and this is one of those cases. This is the beginning of a video game, where you're meant to learn and absorb the mechanics in order to use them for the rest of your 20 or so hours beating gyms. An especially salient point given that this was the first game in the series. To not have a single worthwhile option outside of your starter against a typing that is primarily physically defensive is frankly absurd, and means that any poor soul who picks Charmander is in for an unholy amount of grinding. The worst part, though, is that there are only 3 or 4 trainers in Viridian Forest to fight for a sufficient amount of experience. The rest of your grinding will be done against wild Pokemon, which give less experience because they're wild, and even less because they're much lower leveled than anything in Brock's gym. I had no idea what I wanted to use against Brock, so I had to just grind up all the Pokemon I had that wouldn't die in 5 seconds, so that they could hopefully lower Onix's attack faster than they die trying. Fun fact, did you know that critical hits disregard status changes? When I lowered Onix's defense around 5 times, Critical hits were suddenly a huge detriment to my attack power because the calculation is done on the base power of that attack, disregarding all defense or offense changes. You can bet this led to my death in more than one endurance battle. This is a cyclical frustration until you're high enough level. You start off with a limited amount of money, there are only 3 or 4 trainers which are currently your only source of money, and whenever you lose a battle, some of that money just disappears. Maybe you can cheese some of the fight with potions when Brock's Pokemon aren't one-hit KOing you, but those potions are finite use items that don't respawn after a team wipe, and if you lose enough times after continually saving the game, you won't have enough money to buy more potions. When you're out of money, you're out of options. This is when the grind kicks into high gear. Grinding to absurdly high levels outside Pewter City, running back and forth from this patch of grass to the Pokemon Center, yeah, I think there might be a problem here. It's not even just that your Pokemon take a lot of damage, it's also that they do little to no damage thanks to the type matchups. When a move is not very effective against a typing that is highly defensive, that health bar will not budge, while they naturally coast through the fight with normal damage even when they're lower level than you. Type matchups matter just that much to a battle. The solution, I feel, would be to not start the game out with such a highly defensive typing. Instead, perhaps using the normal type would have been a good compromise. While it may not teach you right away about type advantages, it means that no matter which starter you pick, the early game won't be split between 2 radical difficulty extremes. As a base single-player RPG, it still works past Pewter City since there are a lot more Pokemon and thus a lot more options. Your Charmeleon's also gonna suck against Misty. The difference here is that you have at least some reliable options. Unfortunately, you kinda have to put up with a lot of uninteresting filler in between gym leaders. The stuff you do in between Brock and Misty is on rails. You go from point A to point B, which isn't inherently a bad thing. But trainer battles are rarely, if ever, challenging, and random encounter rates are really damn high. So what you quickly realize is that all you're doing in between gyms is walking through hallways, getting interrupted constantly by wild encounters and trainers, until you finally, maybe, get challenged by the gym leader. Making monotype bosses will railroad you into learning type matchups for sure, it just doesn't always make for a challenging fight. If you have an answer to a gym leader's defined typing, you win. Lieutenant Surge is located in Vermilion City, right next to the Diglett Cave. Diglett is a ground type, meaning it resists all of Lieutenant Surge's Pokemon, and so if you go catch a Diglett, the deed is done before you've even begun. The fights that often matter are the ones that don't follow the rules of their own supposed skill set. Lance, the final member of the Elite Four, is supposedly a master of the Dragon type. Is he, though? 2 of his Pokemon aren't even Dragon types, they merely resemble dragons. This is obviously because the Dragonite line are the only Dragon types in the first generation, but this also made for one of the coolest fights in the entire playthrough. Why? Because his team was unpredictable. All of a sudden there was a Water type, a Rock type, no longer could you sweep him with Ice type moves. Compare that to Blaine, a team of 4 pure Fire types. Gee, I wonder what I should use to beat him. The only time in Generation 1 that I've ever struggled against a gym battle is against Brock.